Good evening. Welcome to MUFON LA. My name is Steve Murillo, State Section Director for MUFON LA. Tonight we bring Brian Boldman, and he's going to talk about the mystery of angel hair. Brian Boldman became interested in aviation at a young age, which led to a pilot's license and a career with a major airline as an FAA airframe and power plant mechanic. After witnessing two UFOs over Charlotte, North Carolina in 1989, he began a study of the phenomenon, which led eventually to angel hair research. After numerous visits to various libraries and archives, interlibrary loans, and FOIA requests, he has compiled a database of over 250 cases. He has self-published Angel Hair News Clippings, 1947 to 2002, a collection of 60-plus newspaper articles about angel hair cases. He has appeared on the Bob Hieronymus radio program, Hilly Rose Sirius Radio, and OVNI Televista, a Mexican cable TV show. Presentations include the National UFO Conference in Beverly Hills and MUFON, North Carolina. Please, everybody put your hands together for Brian Boldman.
Well, I'd like to thank Steve for the invitation, Sandra Marsh, Jolene Ray Harrington. If I said that correctly, I have not met her, and Ann Druffel, and my friend Barbara Snowberger for her hospitality, putting up with me while I'm out here. I am going to talk about angel hair, and I guess I should start by saying it has nothing to do with angels, and nothing to do with pasta, but it does have to do with UFOs. Go ahead to the next slide, please. This phenomenon goes back, actually the first report that I found was dated about 50 BC in the Council of Marcellus, where it was reported that a huge fall of a gossamer-like spiderweb type material fell over an area of Rome. The Japanese have reported cases in 687 AD, 1477, 1596, and in England it fell in 1741. None other than Charles Dickens wrote about that fall in a periodical that he published called All the Year Round, so it goes way back. This particular event here is called the Miracle of the Snow, and what was reported to have happened, according to the legend, Pope Liborio, which was Pope from 352 to 366 AD, had a dream where he was told there would be a miracle on a hill in Rome. The next day, August 5th, 352 AD, a strange substance like wool fell from the sky. And this fresco was done about the 5th century. I'm not sure exactly who did this, but you can see here it's some kind of a white patch on the ground, some sort of a substance that fell out of the sky. Now, there are a lot of religious connections with this angel hair, and I guess that's the only real connection with angels. But I'm going to show today that this comes from UFOs, is associated with UFOs, and of course, through these frescoes, we know that this phenomenon happened a long time ago, 352, as I said. Next slide. This was painted by Panicali about the 5th century. And what this shows, to me, it's really interesting. You have what appear to be UFOs, and what's interesting, the angel hair UFOs are often reported in groups of 2, and if you look here, it almost seems like these are in groups of 2. And the fact that he's sitting here scraping this stuff shows that it's a physical, tangible substance that was on the ground. Well, in Rome, what they do, every August 5th, they have a big celebration to commemorate this event. And they built a basilica on the spot where this fell. Next slide, please. This is it. This is called the Basilica of St. Mary Major. It's in Rome on Esquilino Hill, and every August 5th, they throw white rose petals off the top of this church to simulate or to recreate the miracle that occurred then. Okay, next slide, please. Now we're moving up into the late 1800s, early 1900s. This is Charles Fort. I'm sure a lot of you know who he is. He's considered by a lot of people to be the father of ufology, because he went through science journals, New York Public Library especially, and over in England, British Museum in England, and went through a lot of the old records to look for these anomalies that scientists refuse to look at. And I went to the New York Public Library Special Collections, where all of his notes are kept. He wrote them on little slips of paper about 2 inches across. I don't know why he did that, but I guess he was frugal. He didn't want to waste paper or something. And I have some of his notes here. Next slide, please. This is one, has nothing to do with angel hair per se, but it does have to do with UFOs and the fact that he followed them. This is 1897. If you remember, that was the big airship wave. A lot of people reporting these airships, they called them, all across the country. And this is what he wrote: March 15th to May, the airship. And this just shows you what his notes were like. This was actually physically about 2 inches by 1.5 inches in size. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to get into some of his reports of unusual falls, typically called Fortean phenomena, by the way, falls of unusual showers of rocks, all sorts of unknown weird things that have fallen out of the sky, including angel hair. Here he reports about October 1st, silky substance. This is, I know it's hard to read, but it's Pernambuco, Brazil. And then he has a citation there for the annual register. And by the way, the D here, if you're familiar with Charles Fort's work, he wrote the Book of the Damned, where he chronicled a lot of these sorts of phenomena. And that D was his shorthand to let him know to put this particular thing in the Book of the Damned, which he did. Next slide, please. But this is going back to the Pernambuco fall. This is from the annual register. And this shows you a shower from the sky consisting of a substance resembling silk, of which many persons preserve specimens. And another thing here is interesting. It shows you how vast of an area this stuff can cover. It can cover many thousands, or maybe not thousands, but I'd say hundreds of square miles. Phenomena extended to a distance of 30 leagues inland. So, next slide, please. This is another report that he dug up out of the Scientific American Journal, where he reports spiderwebs fell in Wisconsin. And again, there's doubt, Book of the Damned, rather. And what's interesting about that, though, they reported at the later part of October 1881, Green Bay, Vestburg, Fort Howard, Sheboygan, it covered the whole area. And the webs that fell were strong in texture, very white, but there were no mention at all of any spiders that were seen with it. And by the way, that is what this stuff has primarily been assumed to be by entomologists, people that just want to dismiss the phenomenon. They say, well, it's just spider web. Spiders balloon in the fall, generally, in the spring too, but generally in the fall. They migrate by painting out a little line of silk, and the convective air currents take them aloft, and they migrate that way. You know, they either escape population pressures where a lot of spiders are born at the same time, and they want to move, floods, things like that. And what happens is that, and this does happen, okay, webs accumulate in the atmosphere and it can fall to the ground. And that's been what has been reported as the cause of angel hair for ever since I know it's been reported as angel hair. Next slide, please. But now here, we run into some problems with that explanation. It's been reported time and time again to be asbestos-like, strong. You pull it, you can't break it, and it just sublimates, dissolves to nothing. It vaporizes. And that, to me, is not indicative of spiders, because spider web is a polypeptide protein. As a matter of fact, a strand of spider web Well, it's 5 times stronger than a strand of steel of the same diameter. And so this stuff is amazing. It's amazing material, and for it to just dissolve to nothing, it just, you know, I don't see how it can possibly be. But this happened in, was this Montgomery, Alabama, and here it's reported to be cobwebs, asbestos. We'll see asbestos again. Okay, next slide, please. And this is a report. Let's see, this was in the monthly weather review of that same year. And here it says, not spider web, but resembled fine fibers of asbestos. And it's shown a phosphorescent effect, said to show a phosphorescent. So there's a lot of things that early on kind of indicate spider web, maybe not. There's something else to it. Next slide, please. Now going back to the religious connection, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Fatima, Portugal, and the Marian apparitions there. The Blessed Virgin Mary apparently appeared to the 3 little kids. Everybody, I think most people are familiar with that story. But there's something interesting that happened also. Next slide, please. This was the month before. Actually, this is the UFO that was supposedly photographed during that October vision when the children saw the Virgin Mary. But what happened a month before on the 13th, September 13th, next slide please, is interesting. I just found this. This is in Ray Stanford's book. I just found this just the other week. I think this is real interesting because they reported they saw a great globe of light approach. And then what happened, what resembled white flowers or clusters of flower petals drifted from the sky and dissolved before touching the ground. Now that is a classic property of angel hair, and it's just real interesting that. But I've also tried, I've Googled this stuff, I've tried to find this guy in the photograph that's referred to here. You can Google this guy's name and you get no hits. As amazing as that is. Next slide, please. Now I'm going into the 20th century and some really, really interesting cases. This is actually a pre-Project Blue Book record card. This is a Project Sign card I got from the National Archives, Nara 2 at College Park, Maryland. And this is the typical Blue Book explanation. They blow it, you guys know that Blue Book just blew everything off however they could just to get it out of the media, people's attention off of it. Well, this guy claimed it was spider webs, or the Air Force did, but there was a couple of problems with that. For one thing, these webs came from a large sphere that arose from the ground, so that's kind of odd. Okay, I've got some more of these Blue Book cases coming up. Next slide. I'm taking this in pretty much a chronological order. So that was 1948, and this is just another part of the record card there where Moody evaluates as other spider webs, and they probably didn't even look at them. And this has happened a lot where people reported, oh, this web stuff out of the sky. Well, they just assume that it's spider web, ballooning spider web, and that's what it's written off as without even looking at it. Okay, I've got some photographs here. These are rare. Next slide. Actually, I got this, if you guys know Jim Mosley, he was given this when he was in Peru doing his grave robbing down there. This was taken by a gentleman named Domingo Transco. He was a Peruvian customs inspector on July 19th, 1952. This is an interesting photograph because you can't really make it out here. I think this is actually, I cropped this doing my PowerPoint when I put it in there, but apparently this fibrous material coming out of this cigar was reflected. This is a river right here. This is a river, and the reflection in the river of this contrail showed that it's not a double exposure or a hose. It was actually a reflection of this in the river. And this stuff fell, but nobody apparently had the foresight to collect any of it and save it. We have very few samples of it, but I'm going to get to some analysis of that coming up. Oh, by the way, this was estimated to be traveling at 400 miles an hour, and this was the only shot he got, so we're probably lucky to have that one. Okay, next slide, please. Now this one looks weird at first. At first I thought, oh, that's hokey. This looks like a fake of some sort. But I've been told that this is probably a plasma around the UFO. And if you look at the angel hair fall here into the tree line, now all that looks pretty genuine to me. He took these with, this is black and white, this is before digital of course, taken in Belgium May 16th, 1953. So I don't know. If it's a plasma, that may explain it. I'm not an expert, but there it is. Next slide, please. Now, this case is a really, really good one. Marysville, Ohio. This happened October 22, 1954. UFO over schoolhouse, 60 kids out on recess playing in the field. This giant silver cigar shot off in a flash, in a blinding light. This angel hair dropped all over the schoolyard. And here we can notice some very interesting things. For one thing, it left a 3-mile trail of silvery cobwebs hanging from trees and bushes. Looked and felt like asbestos. Okay, there's that again. And then read on, the teachers said that they picked up several strands of the thread and that it could hardly be broken. They said the substance disintegrated within a minute after being touched. It's weird stuff. The genuine angel hair is weird stuff. Another thing here, this case, and there's another one that I have in 1948 in New Hampshire where it left a green stain on their hands after they handled it. Now, it's just odd. Next slide, please. Okay, I know this is hard to read, but this is one of the teachers at the Jerome School in Ohio, Marysville, just outside of Marysville, where this is Mrs. Dittmer. Well, she wrote this to Project Blue Book after Blue Book said it was nothing but spiderweb. You know, she said, "Well, here's my account." And I know that's just hard to read, and we're pressed for time, so I'm not going to try that. But I do want to just show you here. Let's see. Let's just go to the next slide. I think I've got another little. Okay, she said. Let's see. I've got actually a good printout up here. I can read the pertinent part here where she talks about this. To me, the real impressive and outstanding thing was, as we drove the 3 miles from our school over a country road to the Columbus Road, the telephone wires, the whole distance, were completely woven shut. Go to the next slide. That's actually right there. Just a second. And what she meant by that was on one side of the road, I went out there, I've been there and looked at this, there's a power line on one side and a phone line on the other side. And when this cigar-shaped UFO shot off from the school over the top of the schoolhouse, it discharged so much of this stuff that it was streaming from one side to the other over the wires. And it was like she said, like a misty canopy for 3 miles down this road. So that's a lot of spider web if that's what it is. Okay, next slide, please. And that's just more of her letter. We can just move on. Next slide. Okay, this is a letter written by the principal of the school to Blue Book, or actually his summary of the events that happened there. His name was Rodney Warwick. He's now deceased. By the way, when I've done this research, it's really hard, like for instance, to find the school kids that were female back in the 50s because they've been married, most of them. But I have found a few. Rodney Warwick, like I said, was deceased, but this. Again, he points out the basic, the same properties that the news clipping and the other one said, that apparently this stuff disappeared. So they handle it. It falls out of the sky. It's tough to break. It leaves a green stain on their hands, and then it just vanishes. Very odd. Next slide, please. And this is his drawing. This is in the Blue Book record. He actually drew this sketch of what he saw. And still, Blue Book had the audacity to to claim that it was nothing but spider web. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the same day, October 22, 54, this is Union City, Indiana. It's 100 miles west of Marysville. And I dug into this a little bit just to see, because here they call it chaff. Pardon me. It was chaff here in Union City in a spider web 100 miles away over in Marysville, the same day, same time. Well, here's what he said. The guy's name was Harry Ulley, U-L-L-E-Y, and his wife witnessed a bright, shiny object which he estimated to be traveling at 1,100 miles per hour. He wrote to his congressman, Ralph Harvey, and this is what he wrote to him in part. Immediately following the disappearance of the bright object, we saw in the direction of the spot where the fast-moving object had disappeared dozens of objects floating in the sky. As we watched these dozens of objects floating toward the Earth, some came toward us and one floated directly over our heads. A streamer-shaped object attached itself to the antenna of our TV set. As we watched it, it floated like a streamer in a horizontal position in line with the TV beam between our antenna and the Dayton TV station. So another thing about the angel hair, it has unusual static properties. It has, there's been a case down in Georgia that I'm going to get to in just a bit, where it was seen landing on phone lines and phone poles, and there was a streamer going 100 feet up, straight up into the sky, just sitting there waving around. I think they also blew that off a spider web. Okay, now speaking of weird properties, let's go to the next. Sublimation. Pardon me. I'm just getting over a cold, so. People have reported it to vaporize or vanish. What it really does, this is the physics term for it, it sublimates. And of course you can read the definition. It's where it goes directly from a solid to a gas. And an example of that would be dry ice. You put an ice cube out in ambient temperature on a kitchen counter, it's just going to turn into water and then into water vapor. Put a piece of dry ice out there, it goes from a piece of solid dry ice to a gas. Nothing left. And speaking of weird properties, there are some more. Next slide, please. This fell in Horseheads, New York, February 29th, 1955. And again, spiders do not migrate. They don't balloon in February. It's winter in New York. And this stuff fell in February, so. But there's another real reason why this is probably not spider web. Next slide, please. It was radioactive. Now, there's a possibility, a very slim possibility, that stuff had been blown over from, they were doing the nuclear test out in the desert, but I don't know. Just if you look at the, can we back up to the previous slide? Oh, just hit backspace right there. Yeah. Okay, if you look at the amount of this stuff all around here, and this is a little crop, but I can tell you that this stuff extends out around this whole area. Well, why would a clump of this stuff fall in a very isolated, like a 50 by 50 foot area? If it had been blown in from a nuclear test all the way out from Nevada, wouldn't we expect to have this stuff more dispersed than that? I don't know, it just seems like it. But while we're on this, we can go back to the next slide. While we're on this radioactivity thing, I've got a few more. In 1966, October 12th, in Jonesboro and Johnson City, Tennessee, multiple witnesses observed over 50 silver white objects discharge a white substance in sheets. It fell and it hung on trees, bushes, power lines, the typical things, anything that can catch it really. It just hangs there unless it sublimates. The weird thing is, it was described as hot to the touch. It caused nausea and itching after handling it. And one woman said that her cows refused to go into a pasture where this stuff had been. The FAA came out to investigate this. One fellow had a Geiger counter and said it was radioactive. And out here in Sonora, California, 1976, October 12th. The same exact day, just 10 years to the date that happened in Johnson City, you had it fall in Sonora. And here they described a bright red oblong UFO that discharged this substance. It was examined by a fellow named David Militek. He described it as white, fibrous material of uniform composition, being quite fine with frequent branching and highly charged with static electricity. And I can vouch for that. I've had samples that I've handled, well, I handle rubber gloves, I don't touch this stuff. But trying to put it into test tubes, with tweezers, it wants to cling to my gloves and it wants to cling to the sides of the test tube. It's just real odd behaving stuff. But in Sonora, back to Sonora, 1976, besides that, the way he described it as having been charged with static electricity, it also had tritium in it. Tritium is H3, it's radioactive. Tritium, it's an isotope of hydrogen, H3, and it's used to boost the yield of nuclear warheads, and to obtain it in any appreciable amount, it has to be man-made in nuclear reactors. So what it's doing in angel hair, or a particle accelerator, but either way, it's weird stuff. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this happened really close to where I grew up in central North Carolina. This is another school case. About 60 kids were outside playing during recess, and UFOs popped up over the schoolhouse. Now, this gentleman, he's still alive. He lives in Elon College, North Carolina. I've talked to him a lot. His name is H.D. Lambeth. He was an aerial observer during World War II. He had his wings. He flew combat missions in Burma. And when this happened, he very calmly got his binoculars out of his car, had a student bring him a chair. He sat there and he watched these things over the schoolhouse. And what he described to me, the newspaper here says 10, but he described 8 stainless steel ball-looking things. That's a direct quote from him, that were overhead like domino dots, 2, 2, 2, 2. And he said these things started to move, and when they did that, this angel hair fell all over the place. Okay, next slide. And this is just a blow-up of the picture of kids and him. I found this guy. His name's Tony Engel. He sells State Farm Insurance in Greensboro, North Carolina. He remembers it. He remembers handling it. Next slide. Now, and here's where the strange properties, when they actually do look at it, then they realize there's something going on, that it's really weird stuff. It's not just spider web. They play animal, vegetable, or mineral, like it says there. Actually, I've got to blow up this. Let's go to the next slide. You can see there, they had no ready explanation. And what generally happens, you can see here they say it's, they do the animal, vegetable, mineral thing. Generally what happens is an entomologist or somebody that studies bugs and insects looks at it and says, no, it's a textile fiber, or it's a industrial residue like rayon or something. But then you put the shoe on the other foot and they're like, no, this isn't a textile fiber, this isn't anything that we know about. So they play a guessing game. They don't really, at this time they didn't know. We've now had some good analysis done on it. Okay, next slide, please. And that's just more of the same Witsit case there. A few days later, the paper ran another article. They still couldn't figure out what it was. Next slide. Okay, this happened in Savannah. October 28, 1959, and a pretty large amount fell around Savannah. And what's interesting about this, I didn't do a blow up of this slide, but you can see there the plot thickened slowly after dark when it was reported the mysterious strands were beginning to disintegrate. So there we have that property again. Okay, go to the next slide. Kemah, Texas. This is another really, really odd case. I don't have the exact date for this. This was a Blue Book case. It happened in the spring of '61. Now here they ran into some problems. They had to kind of hedge their bets. So they say, well, it's spider web, but what the lady saw is maybe unidentified. So they didn't really know. I tried to find the witness, and oh, by the way, I actually got some of the names for these witnesses off the Blue Book record cards because I was told by a guy named Bill Weitzel up at College Park, Maryland, that you can request, they're not in the regular old public access microfilm drawers where people go in there and get the regular Blue Book records. You can request 16mm copies of these that are uncensored. Their names are on them, the Blue Book files. It's interesting. They're not blacked out. Now what, let's see, what this woman reported to them. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just a letter back to her from the Air Force. She let them know that something was going on very strange over her house. And her report, her handwritten report, is almost illegible, but I managed to piece it out here, and I'll read part of this, because this tells you the real story. I'll tell you what, let's just go on to her drawing that's in the Blue Book file while I read this. That's just another letter back to her. It's interesting, in one of these letters they tell her that she should read The World of Flying Saucers by Boyd and Menzel, that would explain what it was to her. I thought that was funny. You guys don't know, they were debunkers, big time. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is the full page of a record card, and this just shows you down here at the bottom. I've got to blow up at this. Let's just move to the next one. Okay, this is what she said was over her house when this stuff started falling all over the place. And here's her account. I was coming back from grocery shopping about 10 a.m. I noticed while driving long white cotton or spiderweb-like strings coming out of the sky. They were coming down, hanging all over everything, telephone and electric lines, trees, and everything was just full of them. We could see them coming down, swinging around, some probably a half a mile long. I stopped at the neighbors, and everyone was watching this. Finally, I called Ellington Airport. That's now Ellington Air Force Base, near Houston. They told me to get them a sample of it, which I did, and mailed it to them. They sent many jets over our town as soon as I called them. Then about 2:30 p.m. I went out in the backyard. As I was starting to hang out a piece of clothes, I saw a large string of this asbestos-like stuff coming down near me. I wanted a piece to keep and examine closely, so I called a man rooming in my house to come out and get me a sample. Then he said, "Look, what is that, lady?" Right over our heads was a round machine or whatever it was. It was about 50 feet wide, the most beautiful thing I ever saw. It glistened like a diamond. It looked like two round discs with an opening or windows around the center. It looked like it was pumped. This is odd. It looked like it was pumping in an accordion fashion. Every time it pumped, it looked like sparkles were coming out that looked exactly like the sparkles of a large diamond under the sun or light. There was no noise, not a sound, yet it was just over the top of the trees. We watched it till it went out of sight. It was the brightest aluminum I've ever seen, like the most shiny foil in sunlight. We were not imagining this, we did see it, and she underscored that 3 times. Okay, and next slide, please. Now, just to show you that this is really a global phenomenon. Except the Antarctica. I don't have a whole lot of cases from there, probably just because there's nobody that lives there really. This happened in 1961 in around Perth, Australia, August 5th, 1961. Next slide. I've got an enhancement of that. And this is what was reported down there. 12 silvery white metal saucers like the Sputnik, trailing a white substance which crumbled before it could be preserved, were sighted flying at about 10,000 feet. So there we have these reports of this stuff sublimating, UFOs involved, on the other side of the planet. So it's not just a U.S. phenomenon by any means. Next slide. This is another Blue Book case, Farmington, Utah. This is called the duck hunter case. This guy was out hunting ducks, and he said he heard what sounded like a flock of ducks coming over his position. When he looked west from his blind, he noticed a gray and silver round ball 3 feet in diameter approaching him from the west at approximately the speed of a jet aircraft. The object was trailing what appeared to be gray or silver twine or cobwebbing. And the object passed over the blind, swerved to the southeast, and accelerated tremendous speed and disappeared within 1 to 2 seconds. So while this isn't a typical angel hair drop where it falls all over the ground, apparently this thing was discharging something. Okay, now to kind of let's go to the next slide. Oh, it's just a personal thing. That's my cat Roswell. Thought I need to put that in there to kill some time because I said I'm nursing this throat situation. Next slide, please. This was when I was out here in October for the NUFOC conference. I had a blast. You guys that live in the area next year, please come to that conference. It's really a good one. Good people involved with it. Okay, next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about this. Angel hair waves. If you're familiar with the UFOs at all, you know that UFOs come in waves. You know, you can have a whole lot of activity and then no activity. They come and they go. Angel hair is the same way. There's just one little difference with angel hair. In 1954, I can read there, France and Italy. In 1973, South Central U.S., the angel hair wave, all these cases that happened were concurrent with the UFO wave, exactly concurrent. Next slide, please. Now, this shows you, Larry Hatch has a UFO database that has tens of thousands of cases in it, and I've used his data here. The dashed line shows you the intensity of UFO sightings over the years. This is from, what, 47 to, what I run it to, 2000. Now, I have to explain this a little bit. Because there's so many UFO cases compared to angel hair cases. Angel hair cases are relatively rare compared to UFO cases. And that's another reason they've been kind of blown off as not important or nobody's looked at them, because they are rare cases. In the last couple of decades, we've only had really a handful, but we've had some good ones. But I had to split the chart into two grids. You've got the number of UFO cases here going up to 1,200 and UFO cases going up to, what is that, 70? I can't really see it that good. But here, 1954, red is, these are the angel hair cases. There's a huge spike right concurrent with that wave in Italy and France. At the same time they were seeing UFOs, this stuff was falling all over the place. And also there was a spike in 73. This is really not the best chart. I probably need to redo that. Next slide, please. Now, 1954. This is a case from 1954. It happened in Rome. I've got to blow up with that. Next slide. And there you see this stuff's reported. They see fine cotton or wool particles hanging on the telephone wire. It's just classic. And that's just to show that there you go. That's fine. The 1954, they did have angel hair cases in Italy. Now here, this is telling. This right here will show you how the UFO wave and the angel hair wave are concurrent. This is from the CISU. Now I can't speak Italian, but it's the Italian UFO Study Center. You know. And that's the magenta. That's their report of cases during this October. This is October 1st here, down to the end of November. The magenta is all the Italian cases. The blue are the reported Italian angel hair cases. They line up perfectly, just absolutely perfect. And there's hardly any before this or after. Okay, next slide. In 1973, it happened in the U.S. The whole south central U.S. Was just really, I got over a dozen cases that just happened in a few day period of time there in October. And again, I should mention that October is a pretty prominent month for it, and that has led a lot of people to believe that, well, it's got to be balloon spiders because your annual peak is in October. But I think the reason is because whatever the craft that produce these, they need dry air. They need low humidity. It's just like, you know, when you get a shock on a doorknob. Well, when it's, I know back home when it's cold and dry, you can really get shocked. But in the summertime, when there's a lot of humidity, the charges dissipate out because of the humidity. So that's probably why we have an October peak. But here, this there was something here I wanted to point out. What is this guy there? The Governor Edwards asked if he had seen any of the sergeant. He replied, "No, I don't drink at all." Just a typical reply. But it fell all over. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, it's reported here. It's fallen, and I didn't do a blow up of this. I probably should, but it was reported to fall and disappear. What they call disappear. We know that it actually sublimated. Next slide, please. And this is just another news clipping. Odd filmy substance drifted down from a clear blue sky. And see, that's typical of a low humidity day. Really, like a classic case would be UFOs are seen on a clear fall day, discharge this stuff, and it usually happens when they accelerate. When they shoot off, that's when it's been seen the most. It actually apparently has something to do with propulsion, I think, because it's been reported. I've got, oh gosh, I guess probably 22 cases at last count where witnesses reported the UFOs started to maneuver. If they had been hovering, they would start to maneuver, and this stuff would start to appear, or they would just shoot off, like the Marysville, Ohio case over the school. They shoot off, and this stuff would be ejected out of the back when it did so. But let's go to the next slide. This is an old NICAP. If you're familiar with old NICAP record cards, I know Ann Druffel is. This case happened in Hamilton, Illinois. I've got a blow up of, the incidental down here is very interesting. There. They took some of this stuff which melted as it was touched. What remained was placed on the pool table in the basement. The next morning it completely disintegrated. And this is Hamilton, let's see, that October 19th, I think that was, or the 18th. Well, anyway, all around the 18th or the 19th, angel hair was just rampant. And also, that's about the time the Hickson Parker abduction happened, which I think is interesting. And also, what else happened during that same week in history? Next, the coin case. If you guys are familiar with this, Air National Guard helicopter flying over Mansfield, Ohio, had an encounter which is just tremendous. If you're familiar with how helicopters operate, there's a collective pitch lever that they actually raise the helicopter up and down with. They change the pitch of the blades. And they had this collective pitch fully bottomed out. The thing should have been in a power dive to the ground, but this UFO was seen over the top of them, and it actually sucked them up toward it. They actually gained altitude with the collective bottom. It's just incredible. But this case, actually the National Enquirer well, gave them a $5,000 prize as being the most impressive case of the year that year. But this October 18th thing, it just, all these angel hair cases happened right then in the central part, south central U.S. Just incredible. Okay, next slide, please. And this just shows you, this is a kind of a breakdown of all the totals, just aggregate totals here. This is the total number of cases that I had in this particular. This is from 1947 to 2000. And you can see, this is the important point. In 40% of these cases, I think it's about 215 cases now, sublimations reported. And angel hair seen concurrently with a UFO is 57%. So that is high. That's actually a statistically significant number. And this also shows you the breakdown by property, by month. And you have these huge October and November peaks. But then again, well, if it's ballooning spiders, how come in April and May we don't see, as April is when they really balloon in the spring, and there's nothing. But now what's happened here? These lines are skewed because of the huge 1954 and 73 waves that happened in October. So a lot of these cases came from the 1954 French and Italian wave and the 73 U.S. wave. Okay, next slide. Okay, now we're getting into some really current stuff. A fellow by the name of Tom Brewer, which did something that I wish more people would do, had the foresight. He was driving on I-5 north of Sacramento on November 11th, 1999, and he saw this stuff drifting down from the sky. He had the foresight to pull off of I-5. This is right off I-5. He took pictures of it. He actually used a pen and a cassette tape case to give us a size reference. He saved samples, and we've had them analyzed. Okay, next slide. This is a 60X blow-up of that. By the way, this was taken by Phyllis Budinger, which some of you may know. If not, if you're going to the National MUFON Conference this year in Denver, she's going to be presenting there. If you remember the analysis of Betty Hill's, a piece of Betty Hill's dress that was in one of the recent MUFON issues, she did the analysis. That's her article. Well, she's analyzed this stuff for me. We've done about 4, I think 5 now. We're working on getting another one right now. Next slide, please. Now, 3 days before the Brewer stuff, the Sacramento fall happened on the 11th, on the 8th of November, it fell in Vercelli, Italy. This is, of course, centimeters, the big hash marks. But and I've got some, I got some really good micro photographs of that. Let's just move on to those. Okay, the Italians they're not too shabby when it comes to this, to angel hair research. These are, let's see, what is that? I can't read the power, but they go progressively up in magnification. So let's just move through these. You can just take a look at it. Okay. Okay. I'll tell you, back that up. I want to see the magnification on that, just for my own curiosity. 50,000. That's magnified 50,000 times. Okay, next slide, please. This is Phyllis's work from one of her reports to me, which unfortunately I didn't have the digital copy of this. I just had to scan this, so it didn't come out that great. But you can see the comparison here. The angel hair strands are very, it's almost like they're like lined up with each other. They're not like, look at the spider web, it's just a big mass of stuff. There's no really organization to it. The angel hair seems to be stranded like that. And then also, if you look, also you'll see these clumps of stuff on it. Well, that's the capture, these are capture silks the spider uses to capture its prey. It put out two types of silk. I'm sure a lot of you know this already, but some of the spider web doesn't have this glue on it, some of it does. Well, this is obviously spider web because it's got the adhesive on it, and that's shown here. Okay, you can see it on that piece of spider web, but if you look how clean these are, there's a definite difference. And also the diameter of this stuff. Angel hair strands can be, really minute. A human hair can be, I think it goes from about 30 to 150 or 250 nanometers. But angel hair is down into the 1s and 2s. It's very small stuff sometimes. Okay, next slide, please. Here's Phyllis's analysis of this. And I won't read this whole thing, but I will tell you that I have talked to some biochemists down at North Carolina State and UNC, University of North Carolina, and they tell me that some of this stuff is definitely not in spiderweb. It has nothing to do with it. For one thing, carbonyl sulfide has nothing to do with that, and also the hydrocarbons. This may be part of the clue as to why this stuff sublimates. These are volatiles. These shouldn't be there at ambient temperature and pressure, in other words, regular room air. But the hydrocarbons, they're light branching hydrocarbons, and these are really volatile. 2-methylpropene, 2-methylpropane, they shouldn't be there, but they are. Really weird. Okay, next slide, please. Now I want to talk a little bit about sample collection. Typical UFO type, you know, if you research UFOs, if you're an investigator, then you already know this stuff. You know, get attention, scan the sky. You need to store it in as airtight a container as you possibly can and as sterile as you possibly can. If you're driving along and you see this stuff, I would say it's something like a drinking straw that's still in a wrapper. You know, something like that that's not contaminated with all kinds of oils or stuff that you don't want to contaminate it with. And also, it should be stored as cold as you can get it. I would say this, if I was driving out in the middle of nowhere or away from a refrigerator or freezer, which I don't know if you want to put this stuff in there anyway with your food if it's radioactive, but stop at a convenience store, get a bag of ice, and whatever sample, you know, put it in a Ziploc baggie and then just shove it right in the middle of the ice. And then, of course, call me. That's important. I need to know about it so we can get it analyzed. Okay. Now this is a current case. Well, fairly current. This happened. Well, you can see there, August 10th, 1998, in Australia. Again, another Australia case. This was a classic case. The witness reported seeing. Actually, it was more than one witness. It was several. Reported seeing UFOs overhead that were actually playing with each other. They were leapfrogging each other. They were doing right angle turns, and every time she saw them do a really sharp turn, she'd see a puff of this stuff come out the back. So there again, there's some sort of connection, I think, with propulsion and you know, whatever makes these things. These strands, it just apparently does have to be some sort of a. Well, I'll read. This is actually her report, and I'll just read this. They would hover, shoot off rapidly, and perform rapid right-angle turns, leapfrog each other, or line up in formation. When they maneuvered or increased speed, they saw a cobweb-like substance coming from the objects. And then she's talking about her daughters here. Her daughter saw it. Covered bushes, fences, telephone lines. It was described as white and strong, requiring a good tug to break. As she handled it, it dissolved away to nothing. So that happened again in 1998. So we haven't had a whole lot of cases in the 90s, but we still have these classic cases. They still happen. Another interesting thing about the Corindi case, there was a Telestra technician, that's their telephone guys down there, that was working in Pilloway. He was 40 miles from where this happened, and he saw it, landed on his truck. And it also evaporated when he handled it, sublimated. And I got this. I didn't, unfortunately, get a slide made of this, but I just got this off the internet, and this is from the Northern Daily Leader down in Australia. They just had another fall in Corindi. I have trouble with that word. Australia, it happened on August 22 last year, so it's still going on there. Okay, next slide. Okay, I know a lot of you guys know Santiago Yatura. I got these from him. This happened in, oh, I left my note about this, but basically what happened is Abby Parker, this is a crop field back of her house, saw blue lights out, and I think she reported some sort of luminous entity, but I'm not real sure about that. But, and I also don't have the year this happened, but this is a recent case. But here, this is odd because it's got a yellow tint to it. Can we just go to the next slide? And here, this is Santiago's slide again. He's comparing it to a fall in Spain and Abby Parker's fall in England, and they're both this yellow substance. This isn't typical angel hair, and I'd love to have this analyzed. We're still working on that, as well as a case down in Monterrey, Mexico. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now just to kind of recap on this. This is why, and I've been abbreviating angel hair as just AH, just like we abbreviate UFO or unidentified flying objects, just to save time really. But it's been reported for just a long time. Multiple high quality witnesses, and they report similar details, whether they're in Australia, whether they're in the UK, in the US, they report UFOs. They report the sublimation, high static charge. Did we ever get the video, the videotape? Because I've got some footage of me actually. I was describing how this stuff didn't want to go into the test tube when I was collecting it. I've got some video of that if we can get it. If not, it's not that big of a deal. It just shows you the high static charge is really all that I had that for. But I guess we're going to have a little bit of time to kill, maybe. But anyway, they've also found these really unusual constituents in it. Boron, and back in the old days, there was actually 4 cases that were reported about 5 years apart. One of them, I think, let's see, Italy, I think mainly Europe, but also down in Australia, they reported boron, silicon, calcium, and magnesium as the primary constituents. Now, the silicon, calcium, and magnesium, that's in the Earth's crust. I mean, that's pretty common. But boron is not that common, really. I mean, there's pockets where you have borax, but it's just not everywhere. And to have 4 cases where the same 4 constituents are reported on different continents is just, I think it's odd. And then, of course, we have the correlation to UFO waves, 54 and 73 in particular. And then we have the high number of UFOs that are reported as angel hair falls out of the sky concurrently. So that just tells you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is for anybody that wants more information. You can go on the internet and read this for nothing. This was published by CUFOS, Center for UFO Studies in Chicago, and it has all the data that I presented today, well, except for some of the newer stuff and more. It's got a lot more information in there. You can go and read it. Let's see, next slide. I've got a domain now, and I'm setting up a web page. But if you just, that's easy to remember. There's a link to that that IUR article on that web page. All right. Okay. Here's again. This is just showing you what. This is how I got it from Tom Brewer. This is the Sacramento sample. It is static, it's statically charged, and what's really interesting, it's hard to make out here, but I think I got it on this clip. There was one individual strand that I found that fell off of this little mass here that had an opposite charge. It would be repelled by what was attracted. This was attracted to would repel the other piece. Odd. It's like opposite poles or something. I don't know. But what's coming up after this, because this isn't anything but me trying to put it in a test tube, I think it's an outstanding case, but there it is, that little strand right there acted totally opposite of the other piece.
Wow.
I also remember when I tore a piece of this sample, I tore it apart to make 3 separate samples, 3 different bottles for obvious reasons.
What's interesting is that aggregate, it seems to be drawn toward a non-conductor such as the glass or my gloves, while this particular one strand seems to be Well, an opposite pole, it's repelled.
Should pick up the other end.
Oh, well, probably didn't think about it. But it also, when I tore it, it made like a ripping sound. Okay, what's coming up? This is some videotape. The tape itself is poor quality, but what it shows, you're going to see a few, not a whole lot of angel hair, but you'll see a few strands. And I got it chopped up because I had to cut out a little bit of profanity and also some really poor tracking problems. But yeah, well, you'll have that. Okay, here you go. You can see it right here. And you'll see the little I'll just let this run without comment. It's I think about what, 4 minutes. Barbara, can you get me some
Is this falling from the sky, Brian?
Yes. And you see the little cigars? I mean, they're not cigars, the little globes.
How the hell is that? There you go. Shadow.
Now, what you're going to see here in just a second is, if you look at this stuff there, okay, you're going to see a jet fly past that leaves a contrail. Okay, there's one of them right there, all over the place. And the point I want to make is, you watch how fast the contrail just disappears. And this stuff lingers, which is odd because we think of angel hair generally as something that would sublimate, but then again, it only does that in 40% of the cases. That's important to remember. So there are different types of angel hair. It's not just one thing.
When you find it, how much time do you have to work with it?
By the way, this was shot around Phoenix in 1995, and I don't know the exact date.
Do you know anything about the globes that we see going by in some of that?
Well, other than they're flying and are unidentified, I don't know what they are or where they're from.
What's their approximate size?
I don't know their altitude, so I can't tell you.
Brian?
The big craps out to take out the airplane.
Now, I don't think this is really a typical fall because it's just in little fine strands that you see every once in a while. It's not a big mass. But if you remember the Marysville case where this stuff covered the road for 3 miles, that's obviously a huge amount.
That's a jet trail there.
Yeah, this is just a contrail. But what I wanted to make, the point was that this contrail just disappears to nothing in no time. But that well, I don't know. It may be. I don't know. This case right here, I haven't been able to do a whole lot of work on it yet. But here, this is I think interesting. What's coming up here? I guess that's it. Okay, questions?
Yes. Has anyone tried to eat this stuff?
They have, and I don't recommend it, especially the radioactive type. It's been reported to taste salty. As a matter of fact, if you remember the Whitsett case there, I showed the kids on the steps of the school. One of those kids tasted it and reported it as being salty, and it's been, I think, 2 other cases been reported to taste salty.
Well, Well, I'm thinking of that incident from the Bible where Moses led the Israelites to the promised land. And there was manna all over the ground. They were hungry and nothing else to eat. And they ate this manna. Could this be also from a UFO source, but maybe something a little bit more palatable for that specific situation?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I've speculated about that. I don't think that the modern stuff is too edible. If you go by Phyllis's analysis there with the carbonyl sulfide or the stuff that fell in Sonora with the tritium in it, I don't think anything that's fallen that we've had analyzed in the last 10 years would be an edible product. You know, it certainly wouldn't be nutritious. I mean, if you got nothing but hydrocarbons and carbonyl sulfide, I mean, I don't think I'd want to ingest that.
Yeah. I don't think you mentioned the Maury Island incident, did you?
No, I didn't, but I'm very familiar with that. That's where the slag fell.
What fell?
Maury Island, isn't that where the slag fell out of a UFO? Debris fell onto the island. This is right around Kenneth Arnold's sighting.
Yeah, but in 1947.
Yeah, that's right. They said it was slag that fell out. It's a metal residue of some sort of metal. It wasn't fibrous. It wasn't anything like angel hair. It was a totally different. That would be more like Charles Fort stuff, of weird rocks and frogs and things like that falling out of the sky. But that wasn't an angel hair event. But something fell off of UFOs. That's what they reported anyway.
Were they able to save any samples of that?
I would assume so. I've always wondered about that because apparently at one time there was huge, actually literally piles of this rubble on this island. And but that I think there was some allegations of a hoax, and that kind of just fell apart. And I'm not sure if anybody ever recovered samples. I'm sure other people probably know more about that than I would, since it's not really.
So that stands as an isolated incident then.
Yeah, right. That's not really an angel hair account. That's more of some sort of residue, John Keel wrote about the UFOs using the Earth as a garbage dump in one of his books, where he reports about these silver foil drops. He reports about this case too, Maury Island, where slag is found. And that reminds me of the 1952 account where they knocked a chunk off of a UFO over Washington with a fighter, and it was, I think, mainly silicon. But there's weird things that have fallen off UFOs, and angel hair is just one of them, and that of course is my specialty.
Okay, that's about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Boldman. My question is, I was watching this TV show, this paranormal TV show of the 50s called One Step Beyond, and they have an episode that deals with angel hair, where there's a construction company that is employing a pilot, and somehow the pilot, I don't know if it's here in this country or in Canada. I think it was in Canada. Anyway, so apparently the guy gets blown off course, encounters a UFO and gets blown off course to, say, Australia or some other place, maybe the Southwest, U.S. Southwest. But anyway, somehow he's picked up, and he has his company is notified, and they come out there and they find out that he says that in the area where he's at, the townspeople say that he parachuted down or floated down, and around him was a bunch of this angel hair. And then the narrator or the host of the program says that there's been other cases of it. And in the case where this happens, that it completely disappears. Now, this might have been exaggerated, for TV, but I was just wondering if you knew anything about it, and also, is it true that in cases where you have the angel hair, that it does disappear either after touch or after contact with the ground?
Okay, that's a good question. That's a point I should have made. First of all, I am familiar with that show, but I did not see that particular episode. Do you have a tape of it? Yes, I do. Can we swap some tapes maybe? I'll talk to you later on about it. But as far as when it sublimates, okay, apparently it does it most often when people handle it. I think that's because of the heat from their hands is actually causing it. But also, I think that when it's exposed to oxygen or exposed to the atmosphere, it can just do it on its own. I mean, it's been seen, like we had that one instance in Hamilton, Indiana, was it Illinois, I forget, where they laid it on the pool table and the next morning it was gone. That happens a lot too. Well, they'll actually have a sample. And by the way, people have actually sealed this stuff in airtight containers and it's disappeared inside of it. So, but if that ever happens to you, if anybody ever gets it and puts it in an airtight container, don't take the top off because we can do gas chromatography on what's left in it.
Brian, what the hell is this stuff?
Your guess is as good as mine.
No.
I have
Your
no
guess
clue.
is much better than mine. You've been researching it.
Well, absolutely. And I'll tell you, we know what's in it. We don't know how it's made. But basically what it is some sort of, it's carbon based. So that means it's organic. But not all of it's organic. There was a case analyzed in, I think it was in France. Yeah, it was in France where they reported, no, I'm sorry, this was Portugal. And I actually have that analysis, but I don't know if I have it with me. They reported that it was part inorganic and part organic, which that just simply means that, part of it had carbon in it.
Mm-hmm.
But,
well, we know events in which it occurs. We know that it apparently comes out of unidentified flying objects.
That's exactly right.
And it occurs more often when the craft seem to be doing maneuvers.
And on dry days.
Oh, on dry days as well.
And on dry days as well. So that's all pointing to me that it's some sort of, it takes the right atmospheric conditions, and this is important. This is probably why it's so rare. Everything has to be just right for this stuff to form.
Well, it seems that one unescapable conclusion is it's a byproduct of the activity of the UFO.
I think so.
Before we don't know about any exhaust from a UFO, and if it's carbon, then you start to think that maybe it's hydrocarbon fuel somehow that they're using. But it does seem to be a byproduct of its activity, of its acceleration, of its movement.
I think so, and also there's a lot of clues that also point to some sort of propulsion byproduct. For instance, the boron in it. Boron, they use that to soaks up radiation. They use it in nuclear reactors. Mm-hmm. So boron has unusual properties that are probably tied to this. There's just a lot of little bits and pieces that are starting to line up.
Is there any data about American government analysis of such things? Is there anything at all out there? Have you seen any interest on the part of the government towards...
I've had, as far as my research goes, or government interest into angel hair in general, other than the Blue Book files that I presented,
right.
That's about it.
That's all the public posture on it.
They don't, I've done, well, going back to the FOIAs, they're useless. They don't know what it is. They don't have a clue.
What do you think it is, ultimately?
I can't say anything more than I think that it is a byproduct of a UFO propulsion system.
You'd think the government would be very interested in that, scene. We're real interested in how these things work.
If we had I'll tell you what, if we could, I flew out here from North Carolina, and you guys that have flown across the country know that's a hell of a long flight, which I don't mind. Glad to be here. But if we had the technology to zip me back home in about 2 minutes, I would love to have that. And as far as our technology to go to the moon and to like they just landed the Huygens probe on Titan and all that. I mean, think about what we could do with this technology. You would think that they would be highly interested in it. I haven't seen any evidence of that though.
Yes, I was intrigued by the tritium being one of the components. Is advanced isotope of hydrogen with
Tritium.
tritium?
Yeah, it's H3.
Is that, how abundant is that on Earth versus, say, a lunar environment or something? Is that a clue to maybe an extraterrestrial origin?
Yeah, it is. As I said, it's only manufactured in any appreciable amount on Earth in either a particle accelerator or a nuclear reactor. And I'll tell you where there is a whole lot of tritium. It's 93 million miles from here, our star. It's just got gobs of it. So it's interesting. I mean, all this...
Yeah, tantalizing.
It is. It is. Thank you.
Well, I think that's it, Brian. Thanks so much for coming. We all enjoyed it. Thank you very much.